Thank you. Well, to start off, I just want to give everyone a round of applause and give yourselves a round of applause for making it on a rainy Monday night. Brilliant effort and lots of smiles around the room as well. I can see we've still got a few people arriving today. So welcome to today's event. We're very excited to be having a bit of a reunion and a kind of a check-in time and looking forward as well in terms of climate action for Australia and the Pacific. So as part of Climate Action Week in Sydney 2026. I want to start by inviting Susan to officially welcome us.
Maybe an acknowledgement. So I'd like to start by saying Warrami, Nagaya Susan, Nagaya Grinji Wawunga, Gumida Biyanga, Gumida Wangra, Madamarong, Tianaga Anaga, Madamarong, Baalia, Gadigal, Guri Pemel. So what I said was, hello, I'm Susan, I'm Grinji Wawunga. With deep honour and respect, I asked to speak to the male spirits, I asked to speak to the female spirits, for permission for all of us to be able to gather and listen to this evening's talk and to walk country with us. And I guess, you know, in terms of being part of the oldest surviving living culture on the planet, it's time that we started to do things together and respect each other in our shared humanity and also in our shared knowledge base. And particularly as Indigenous people, that we have lots to share in terms of, you know, where we go into the future. So thank you for having me. Do you want me to keep going? Oh, apparently I'm keeping going. Okay. So as I just said, that we are part of the oldest surviving living culture on the planet. And there are things that are important to us in terms of our cultural context that, you know, we need to be able to impart with everybody who now calls this continent home. And I'm just going to embarrass him and acknowledge Martin Tomic, who is the head of the TD school, of which I'm a part of, and very, very proudly an industry professor of Indigenous with the TD school. So part of why I'm here is because I'm in UTS and also trying to share what's important about what we can bring to the table as Indigenous peoples. And I was at a conference a couple of years back, the World Indigenous Education Conference, and everyone came to Sydney. And what really amazed me was, in terms of who we are as Indigenous people and what we bring to this continent, but globally as well. One of the gentlemen, First Nations from Canada, Turtle Island, said one of the things that he valued about colonisation, and I almost fell off my chair. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. And he said, we all learn English. So we have now the ability to communicate with each other. And I could see that and I understood that. And I thought, yeah, all right, I can accept that. It's hopefully not that we lose the essence of who we are. And as Indigenous people globally, we bring something else to the table. And when we can all speak together and vision together and reframe things for everyone who identifies as being human, I think that's what's really important. And we don't do it just for ourselves. We do it for future generations that are coming through. And so a lot of people talk about the 7th generation legacy. So who are we today? Who are the adults that you know, sometimes we act like adults and pretend that we're adults. But we need to make sensible decisions for the future. So I talk a lot about planting the seeds of a tree of the shade that we will never sit under, but we are gifting it forward. And hopefully the generations that come after receive that gift, and that, you know, as hopefully the planet doesn't get too hot, that there is a cool shade for the young ones to sit under. And I kind of hang on to that as a hope for the future. And I can see a lot of sadness and a lot of psychological distress in our young ones. So we need to do better as adults, and we need to collaborate, and we need to make sure that what we do, we are bringing the young ones along with us, because otherwise who are we doing this for? And I think that, you know, when we have an opportunity to come together, and particularly down this end of the globe, that we are many different people from many different islands, and I think that diversity is something really beautiful and a gift to everyone. So I might stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan, and a round of applause for Susan, and thank you for your acknowledgement for country. So we're here tonight as well to kind of celebrate the Pacific Youth Environment Network, which was set up 25 years ago, auspiced by the United Nations and the Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Network. And it kind of started mostly through just the voluntary actions of a bunch of kind of committed young people from a range of countries around the Pacific. So that included Australia, Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Niue, Nauru, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu. And we have some of our founding members here today and online. And really, we thought it was a timely opportunity to come together and look back on what have we achieved and where are we at sort of 25 years later, at a critical time when Australia is working closely with the Pacific, shaping an approach and an opportunity for dialogue internationally as we look towards COP31, which is coming up later this year in Turkey. So, could I get the next slide, please? Yeah. So my name's Viisti Dickens, and I'm also one of the founding members of the Pacific Youth Environment Network. I teach at the TD School as well as in the business school at UTS, and have been doing so for about the last 3.5 years. And also want to acknowledge Martin, who's the head of the TD School, who's here this evening. And what I found really interesting is that there's so much ingenuity and innovation from the next generation of young leaders. And so we thought it's really a great opportunity to bring together a bit of a conversation intergenerationally, transdisciplinary, and from, you know, members of government, industry, not-for-profits, and just active, concerned citizens who are interested in perhaps rethinking what we could take to be priorities as we sort of move forward. And we're hoping that in the spirit of inclusivity this evening, we'll have the chance to do so. So we do want to have a dialogue with the audience as well as having some presentations from our key speakers. So I just want to acknowledge all of the people who are involved this evening. So Susan, we've got Raymond from PNG, who'll speak to us, Sharona from Viisti Capital, and I want to shout out to Viisti Capital, who's the sponsor of tonight's event. So round of applause to Raymond and Sharona. Thank you so much to our sponsors and our special guests. Raymond's travelled all the way from PNG to be with us this evening. And also to Christina in the audience, shout out for the Pacifica program at UTS for helping us put that on. If we can have a round of applause for Christina. Yep. And James and Jackie, who in the bottom left-hand corner we'll hear from in a minute. Jay and Mede, who are from New Zealand, who are online. Thanks, guys, for joining us from New Zealand and Spain. And also to Sanal Singh, who's the head of the Inclusion Equity Program at UTS, has been really instrumental in bringing this together, and Matt Keane, who we'll hear from as well, the Honorary Matt Keane, who's an adjunct professor at the Institute of Sustainable Futures at UTS. So this is us 25 years ago. We look almost the same. That's our founding committee members. And Andrew, who unfortunately couldn't be here, but I just want to shout out to Andrew, and everyone give a round of applause to Andrew too, if that's okay. He's hopefully online. He's been really instrumental in pulling tonight together as well. So we're going to hear from James, who's one of our founding members, who is also an innovator, and he's got a message for us.
Good evening and greetings from Brisbane. I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you tonight, but I did want to send this message. 25 years ago, a group of Pacific youth sat down and wrote a charter with a very bold mandate that young people from the world's largest ocean should have a voice in decisions shaping their future. So, 25 years on, what is our scorecard? Well, to be honest, it's kind of mixed. We did help put Pacific voices into UN frameworks. Youth climate literacy across the region has grown enormously. Renewable energy targets are now national policy in islands that once ran entirely on diesel. All of that does matter. But the sea didn't wait for us. Pacific Island nations will experience at least 6 inches of sea level rise in the next 30 years, regardless of what we do now. Just this week, Pacific governments launched the world's first regional guide for climate-related community relocation. We are past prevention, we are in adaptation, and for some communities, we are in survival. So for the next 25 years, we need new thinking. We need systems thinking, connecting finance, food, fresh water, and First Nation sovereignty as one integrated challenge, not as siloed problems. Put simply, the ocean doesn't have departments. This year's priority is simple. Let's ensure that Pacific youth have a seat firmly at the table through structured young youth delegation pathways into the pre-COP process, through intergenerational policy platforms and conversations like this one, and through holding our own government responsible and accountable to the commitments that they have made and will make in our name. The charter that we wrote 25 years ago as youth said that we were igniting participation to catalyse action. Well, you know what? The fire is lit. Now it is time for a new generation to help us build something that lasts. Thanks to our organisers and thanks to everyone attending for your passion and for your support. Take care.
That is all of us, also 25 years ago. Thanks for indulging us sharing these photos. But as you can see, we had a really great representation from around the Pacific with our cohort of people. And as James said, we were able to, if I go to the next slide, come together and really shape a really good dialogue around that. So we're going to hear very briefly from one of our other founding members, just takeaways from what that experience working together was actually like at the time.
Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a nice evening. I'm calling in from Yagara and Turrbal country in Brisbane, and thank you for the opportunity to reflect on the Pacific Youth Environment Network, and thank you to UTS for holding this space during Climate Week for the group. Firstly, happy 25 years. I joined the network via James Moody towards the end of my ecology and economics degrees. And certainly what a way to gain exposure to the environmental issues of the Pacific. Amongst all the science and the analysis, some of my main memories of the event are the stories, the poetry and the songs from people like Raymond, Saini, Lai, Mere and Mera. Really lasting impact for me and gave me a first-hand account of the environmental and economic issues facing the region. And I think it was great to hear from so many people, advocating for change, celebrating the wins, but also discussing some of the challenges. They shared stories about physical, spiritual, cultural identity of the life in the Pacific, and I think it really seeded a better understanding of a need to cooperate across the region, certainly on these types of matters. Forums like these and the subsequent declaration are so important to elicit the views of young people, and I think we can agree very important to hear from young people who are stewards of our lands for years to come. All the best, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, Jackie. So where did we get to, if I could go next slide, where did we get to at the end of our Pacific Youth Environment Network is we actually were really busy. So we got to know each other, we exchanged kind of cultural perspectives, and we worked through a number of outcomes, including, as you'll see up there, we prepared a declaration, we wrote a submission to Parliament, we came up with a Youth State of the Environment report, we also tabled a whale sanctuary statement, we included a declaration on climate change, we had an action plan, and we got a lot of media coverage in Australia, in the Pacific and in the Asia region. So it was pretty active. We also put out a request that the Australian government signed an international agreement on climate change, which at the time was the Kyoto Protocol, reduce greenhouse gases and support the Pacific Island countries in terms of capacity building, economic engagement and other support. And we're going to hear a little bit more about, how should we be thinking about that now, what's changed and what do we want to perhaps do differently. And again, I'd like to just invite everyone to reflect on that as you listen to the different presentations, because we'd love to have a bit of an open dialogue with you about that shortly. So interestingly, where we're at now, 2026, is that from a number of different coexisting global frameworks, there's been a kind of move to harmonisation and national regulation, including Australia, around climate emissions reporting. And that's sort of, I guess, offset, pardon the pun, with a need to balance against greenwashing types of behaviours by organisations. So it's a really contemporary conversation and one that continues to evolve quite dramatically. But the good news is that there has been action and there are more opportunities to kind of embed and sort of solidify some of that movement. We have signed the Paris Agreement in Australia, and so there's been some good momentum, and we'll hear more about that as we move towards kind of COP31. So now I want to invite Raymond to share some observations, again kind of putting a bit of a look back as I've just done, and then kind of look forward to where we are now, 2026, and maybe a look ahead in terms of PNG and the Pacific. Thank you very much, Raymond Unasi, who's the Deputy Chair of the National Energy Authority Board from Papua New Guinea. Round of applause for Raymond.
Thank you, Viisti. Good evening, everyone. And I'm very honored to be here. And thank you to Sharona and the sponsors for making it possible for me to be here. Acknowledge the Gadagal people of UTS area. And also acknowledge all of you for taking your busy schedule to be here. Thank you so much. As Viisti has outlined, and a few of our founding members have spoken ahead, Pacific Youth Environmental Network was formed out of passion and out of dedication and commitment for our homeland, for our seas, and for the Pacific that which we are part of. So going back 25 years ago, we were all enthusiastic, young. I think I was somewhere between early 20s, 23, I think, yeah. And we had this network of university students across the Pacific who wanted to make a change for their homeland. And back from where I came from, as the term climate change was not in the vocabulary at all at that time. And people lived in almost 6,000 islands across Samarai to Jayapura, near the border there. And they lived and they experienced various generations of sea level rise, migrations of species, in migration, out migration, which basically told them what's happening with their surrounding. And apart from that, climate change was not in the vocabulary. Schools were beginning to teach about climate change. We're beginning to have UN charters on climate change. So when we had the Pacific Youth Environmental Network gathered in Wollongong to make the Wollongong Declaration, of which I think our friends Mary and the rest who are online played a big role in one of the biggest achievements to date, I think, is the whaling sanctuary. We declared the Pacific to be a whaling sanctuary, that no more whaling ships to come, and that was escalated up to all government levels through our various governments in all the Pacific Islands. And that's something that I would like to applaud the founding members and those who continue to work in conserving the Pacific Ocean, like Mary, who is online. We thank you so much for that effort. Whales are one of the biggest mammals, and the bigger they are, the more you need to do to keep their home safe. And we've done that 25 years ago, and we also looked at how to network into the smaller island states with rising sea levels. And sea level rise, migration out of smaller islands like the Cataracts back in PNG, which 25 years now we did predict that something like that will happen. And we're already making arrangements back at home to move the people from Cataracts Island to some of our bigger islands. And that wasn't possible back then. So that was the inspiration that brought me and two other friends to join with Sharona, Viisti, Andrew, and James, everyone, to partner as members of one community living in the Pacific Ocean. Much of our government worry about things that happen far away, including my government, Australian government, New Zealand government, and they worry less about what happens in their homeland. So I would like to stress here in this forum that we would want to encourage the next generation of young people to network and rise up and communicate through the universities, through the co-ops that might come in their schools and workplaces to advocate for our Pacific region and our Pacific Ocean. Just two or three things that inspired me to build back at home I would like to share from this experience was creation of this authority called National Energy Authority. We'd never had this authority 5 years ago. Myself and a few lawyers, we came together to put the National Energy Authority in place, have it opened as a government organization, and we recruited over 120 civil servants to serve in there, 50% of them to roll out renewable energy, migrate away from dependency on diesel. So imagining you living in the islands, we have like diesel generator systems on all islands, and about 16 provinces depend entirely on diesel generator systems. So 5 years ago, through the National Energy Authority, we decided to phase out 50% of diesel generators and look into solar, renewable energy, wind, biogas. We have opened with development partners 2 biogas facilities in the island. And we have also rolled out about 7 bigger islands with 100% dependency on renewable energy. So we're beginning to phase out diesel dependency off-grid system. So this kind of achievements did not take place overnight, but with inspirations that we have learned from each other in the Pacific region, from the experiences in Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Kiribati, and Australia. We have built wherever we are planted, wherever we went to, the founding members, we have helped our societies. And having said that, I would like to encourage us to go back and give opportunity, like, I have teenage children that needs to go and network with other parts of the Pacific Island and make sure we continue to advocate for our homeland and our culture. And the people-to-people relationship we have will help develop each and every one of us. So with that, I thank Viisti and Sharona, everyone, for this opportunity. And as we go through the questions and answers, we can share more. And I'm pretty happy to answer some questions if you might have during the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond. That's great. And so we're going to go next slide to having a bit more of a chat now around sort of First Nations, Pacific Islands, and some of the opportunities and sort of regenerative practices that might have been observed. So we've heard about a kind of a shift to renewables and sort of the protection of traditional cultural practices. Is there anything further you want to share about sort of what you've seen? Maybe start with you, Susan, around some of the regenerative kind of practices that we could learn from First Nations.
I think there's a lot to learn from us as Indigenous peoples globally. And when we look at how we live in modern society today, and the fact that a lot of our practices were never taken up and were seen as primitive and were seen in a certain light, and now we start to reframe certain cultural practices, excuse me, and call it the circular economy. And we start to rebrand the things that we did in a traditional sense, with modern terminology. And that kind of, I kind of get a bit stumped by that. And I was involved in a circular economy conference a couple of years back, and I had the great pleasure of moderating a couple of sessions with many distinguished people across the Pacific. And all of the things that kind of started to ring true for me was there is such similarity in our cultural practices. And the joy that, I heard in terms of the way all of those things that are important culturally are true for all of us and true for all of the islands. And Australia is just one big island, right? But we tend to divide and silo. And I think that when we look at the whole system, and humans are included in that system, that it's then when we look back to look to the future, there are a lot of practices that we need to bring forth and share. So we talk about country and the importance of country. And that's not just land. It's a cultural framing of how we have lived sustainably for tens of thousands of years. And it's important for us to be, teaching young ones about how to live sustainably into the future. And when I say our young ones, I say that collectively, that, whether you come from the islands, whether you are born here, whether you come from other places, that, that recognition of our shared humanity is actually really important. Getting on the same page is really important. And understanding the uniqueness and the beauty of who we all are and that diversity is really important. So collectively, we have an opportunity to do something different into the future. And if we reach back on this continent to a very long story back and bring that forward, and I'm not saying that, we need to go back to the old ways. We need to go back and bring forth the principles and the philosophies of the way that we used to live, because the last 250 odd years of this continent, of living the wrong way, is how we got to this state of emergency. So listening to Indigenous peoples of the islands, of this big, huge island, you can't not listen to us, because you've seen when not listening to us, the mess that we get into. And what I guess sometimes excites me, sometimes makes me really sad, is when we listen to the elders, when we listen to the knowledge holders, when we can allow those voices to really ring true, that's when we're going to make a difference. When we have young people, as you're saying, when we have young people firmly at the table, that's when we're going to see a difference into the future. And our way was always to bring the young ones along. And even when they're littlies and toddlers, they were always around. And, people say, oh, but, I can't come to that meeting because I have a little one. And I go, I don't care. Bring them along. We can have the meeting in the park. It's okay. We can take the coffee to the park and have the meeting there. So young ones grow up to be teenagers and young adults being a part of the conversations. They start to model the things that we demonstrate to them, and then they're going to grow up to be really strong adults, maybe celebrating 25 years down the track of an anniversary. And then you're bringing your children along with you, and that's what's important. For me, it's kind of like it's a no-brainer, but I also recognise that there are other cultures at play, and not everyone thinks like us as Indigenous people. And at the end of the day, we only have one planet. And I know some people want to kind of go off and fly up, build other lives on other planets. Off you go. Leave this one to us. And you know what? Mother Earth and the way in which we have damaged her, we are insignificant as human beings. She will shake us off if she wants to. And there are, volcanoes and cyclones and all these things because we've ruined the natural patterns of nature and Mother Earth. And if we don't start to tune in and listen, it is to our detriment of the future.
Thank you very much, Susan. So I'll go back to Raymond and just ask you to share a little bit about your kind of previous career as well in terms of working in community and community consultations, and then how might you help us understand what's important from that sort of community and PNG culture into how we're then thinking about things like renewable energy deployment as well.
Thank you. I worked almost 20 years as a biologist with WWF and then with the UNDP, conserving wetlands and forests of the Pacific, as well as across the New Britain Islands, everywhere in PNG. And I have seen a lot of progress in terms of government policies. We have done a fair bit to make sure we conserve the third largest forest in the world, and the challenges that comes with it. So my peers, we tried our best to fight off some of the draconian laws that were created to access to forest, to mow down forests for agriculture in the pretext of agriculture, and they were logging. So we had almost 10 years of legal battle with the government to stop all those, and we have about 5 years ago succeeded in stopping what they call SABL, agriculture business lease for forested areas, and stuff like that. We did with the help of PYEN back then to advocate for one of the biggest rivers, the Fly River, but polluted by Octady mine, and we fought in court and everywhere else. I think it's a big case here in Australia, in Melbourne, and eventually the company had to pull out. So things like that were in the way for us growing up and trying to preserve your home, at the same time see the benefits of economic benefit to the rural people. Viisti, just to give you an understanding of the challenges that we have. I've spoken to a lot of community leaders in the areas that we wanted to conserve the forests or the reefs. And there's one challenge that always comes is that we keep the forest, we keep the plants, we keep the animals. But where is the hospital? Where is the school? Where is the modern medicine? Where is the food? So those are the weaknesses that we see in developing countries, so much as well in other Pacific Island countries, where loggers and other fishing companies go in, give goods, try to build schools, try to build hospitals, and then have access to the forest. So over my career as a biologist, I've seen those challenges, and we continue to fiddle between how to handle that and have a fair share of the forest, have a fair share of the reef concept for the future generations. So it will continue to be a big challenge going forward in developing countries. And as we have said, more young people come into the stream to see the importance of economizing on natural resource versus the needs, everyday needs. Then we will have a secured future. If we have less young people employed in the conservation area, employed in the natural resource management area, then you will see the drop in influence on the government policies per se. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond. And Sharona, I might invite you to sort of respond to that at the latter part of your talk as well. We might move on to your presentation. Or do you want to add something now? Yeah, okay, yeah. So we'll go to the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. And we'll now hear from Sharona from Viridius Capital. And again, thank you so much to Viridius Capital for helping us make tonight possible. Yeah.
You're so welcome. So one of my favourite memories from those few days in Wollongong was after spending quite a lot of time educating ourselves and each other about the state of agreements or lack of agreements about whether or not the world was going to do something to stop this threat that was then really on the horizon of climate change. I'm pretty sure this was you, Ray. You sort of stopped and said to the group, we need to think globally but act pacifically. And that really stayed with me.
I think a round of applause for Ray. Yeah.
Yeah, think globally and act pacifically. I've never forgotten that. And I think I'm here to talk about basically investment opportunities, but I want you to think about that differently. I want you to think about it in terms of power. And I want to think about it in terms of how do you answer the sort of threat that Raymond was just describing, where you have a power imbalance. On one side, you have the traditional owners and custodians, and on another, you have a massive multinational conglomerate that has almost endless funds. When I was 20, I think I benefited from a few things that potentially at the time were also weaknesses, and that's that at that point in history, we had the unbelievable luxury of something I don't think people that age have today, and that's just casual hope and optimism. We just kind of figured we'd get involved, but probably the grown-ups would sort it out. As in, surely, knowing what we did even then about the risks of climate change, something that we had an opportunity then to basically fend off, the global community of adults wouldn't let it just happen. And now we're the adults. And it did happen, and that's not fair. And that is not fair. And so I do want young people to be involved, and you are involved, and I want to make sure that we are making explicit that invitation through these channels. But I don't want that to sound as if we are passing the baton, because we can't. It's not fair. And there are a lot of things that young people can do that people my age and older can't, and different ways of thinking and different things you know and some things you don't know yet and some things that we've already forgotten. But there's a lot of things that you need our help for, such as marshalling that power through through finance. And so on the particular sorts of examples that Ray was talking about, through Viridios, we're involved in trying to find that kind of solution, which is where you have communities who have very high rates of maternal mortality because women giving birth simply don't have access to some of the things we consider so basic here. Sanitary conditions, medical staff and equipment, but things like sanitary tools, lack of school, lack of internet access, all those sorts of things. And one of the ideas that came out of PNG actually quite a long time ago was, is there another way to pay for that valuable service of those communities protecting those forests? Shouldn't they be paid for that? And so out of that idea that originated in PNG, there was a way, basically, by taking a forest in an area that had already had a grant of what's called a forest concession, which is basically a permit to destroy that forest, finding someone else who was willing to pay not to destroy the forest, to protect the forest and conserve the forest. And those projects exist. And I've had the absolute privilege and benefit of seeing that when those projects are done properly, you actually see communities receiving funds for the services of protecting those natural resources. And I'm going to tell you what they're called. And when I say the word, some of you in this room, no doubt, are going to squirm a little bit because they're called carbon offsets. And over the last few years, carbon offsets have had a really bad rap. And I can say this in this room because I've got the receipts. I've been a greenie my whole life. I think that the attacks on the carbon markets are one of the most tragic own goals of the environmental movement in history for several reasons. Number one, yes, there have been problems with some of those projects, but not all of them, and all of them have been dragged down. Number two, when they get dragged down and those funds stop flowing, that maternal health program is gone. And the forest is being logged again. And that's a tragedy. Some of the issues with those credits are because people have considered them to be essentially a way that makes it too easy for polluters to continue to pollute. And there's been some truth to that claim. For instance, those credits need to be sold and bought at a price that means companies have to actually account for the cost of their carbon emissions. That's actually the purpose of them, because as it stands, climate pollution has been part of the tragedy of the commons. In economic terms, it's been an externality. In other words, it has been free to pollute. By purchasing offsets for some or all of their emissions, these companies are actually putting a price on their own pollution. In Australia, we've got a domestic system. It's only the very biggest polluters who have to do it, but now they have to actually offset some of their emissions. And this year we are considering making those requirements apply to more of the emissions and more of the emitters. What that means is it costs them money now. And what we're seeing is all of a sudden, their finance teams are having to weigh up, do we keep funding those offsets Or do we deploy capital to actually reduce our emissions in the first instance? That is carbon markets working. That's what they're supposed to do. So if they're too cheap, it won't work. And by the way, economists will say yes, but what you really need is an economy-wide carbon tax. I agree. That would be the most efficient way to do it. It also tends to lead to social unrest, like the Yellow Vest protest in France. And the reality of the world at the moment is we're in a precarious position for democracy. And I guess part of the reality of not being 20 anymore is I want to do what's realistic, ambitious but realistic. Because the other thing is we do not have any time to waste. We don't. In Wollongong, I remember our colleague from Kiribati tearfully telling us that actually for the first time a few months earlier, a king tide had covered all of the main island. And that's always stayed with me too. But I tell you what, I did feel that meeting my peers in the Pacific allowed me to understand the reality of the threat of climate change in a way I hadn't yet, but it still felt a bit like something happening to other people, and now it's happening here every day. We see it in Australia too, all the time. And one benefit of finance flowing to protect forests and oceans and mangroves and all those natural systems that also protect our precious biodiversity is that we can do it now. We can re-vegetate bushland. Those projects are happening. I've seen them happen. And they can be run well such that they actually don't take away from valuable agricultural land, which is another social risk. We're seeing that too. And we see that with renewables, because in a lot of cases, you actually can't put up thousands of solar panels and still run a farm. You can sort of have them high and you can have grass underneath them, and some people do run sheep underneath them to clip the grass, but you're not really running the same kind of agricultural operation, you're just not. But with carbon projects you can. And some of the best methods are in the north of Australia that has that monsoonal weather pattern where you have a very hot, dry season, and then you have the also hot, wet season. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing extreme floods in some parts of the Northern Territory. One of the main ways that Indigenous communities are generating income is by the use of traditional knowledge and customs of what's called cool burns. So if you set cool fires in those savanna regions of the Northern Territory, and you do it before the weather gets extremely hot and everything dries out, if you do it at the beginning of the dry season, you can actually run fires that sort of burn only up to about 1 metre high. They burn back the fuel, like the grasses. They don't destroy or kill even the saplings, but certainly not the mature trees. And what you avoid is a catastrophic hot fire later in that season that will kill animals and trees. That's Indigenous knowledge. And I'm aware of programs where Indigenous Australians and representatives have travelled to other countries like Kenya to share that knowledge and those practices. So that's a very clear example of how all of those things can work together. Obviously, in terms of understanding the opportunities around decarbonisation, which is broader than just offsetting, right? Because decarbonisation, you need to talk about shifting away from fossil fuels over time as quickly as possible, but it can't be now. There just aren't replacements. For example, you want to get in a plane? You can't run the world's fleet of aircraft on sustainable aviation fuel at the moment. It doesn't exist. It's not at scale. And to grow it at scale, you're going to take up cropping land, so you're going to be sacrificing agricultural land for that as well, okay? So that is just one of those realities. But yes, exploring and rapidly scaling all options for renewable energy is key. And I did want to just kind of call out a few of the opportunities in the Pacific at the moment. So there's a Pacific Climate Infrastructure Financing Partnership that's rolling out a range of renewable projects throughout the Pacific and doing some really exciting and interesting things with like micro solar grids and projects like that. And of course, there's also the Australia Pacific Partnership for Energy, which is a $50 million project that's going to be doing similar work. And I also wanted to call out the Pacific Resilience Facility, which aims to raise $500 million US, and it's got a dual mandate of climate and disaster resilience and social and community resilience. And that's interesting as well because they do have a good number of funds committed, but largely from governments, but they're calling on the private sector to co-fund and co-support. The challenge for that is going to be, when you're talking to investors, you have to make a business case. There's got to be a return on the investment because investors, unlike governments, are not operating as charities. They can't survive without turning some kind of profit. They just by definition have to do that. But I do think that that's an interesting call for those in the audience, both in the room and online, to consider whether there are projects or potential projects in communities throughout the Pacific that could use a combination of public and private finance to deliver and deliver those real benefits. And an example of one of them that I thought was very interesting was providing solar power for a coffee operation so that you get the return via the production of coffee and you are saving both emissions and costs on the diesel that you no longer have to buy. So that's a really brilliant example of how capital can work and have positive effects. So just want to say that.
Thank you. And there has been, I think, climate impacts on the coffee industry and coffee prices sort of going up. So some interesting reflections there. And we're going to have time to have a bit more of a Q&A shortly. Before we do, I think I want to head to a couple of, if I go to the next slide, please, head to a couple of our online presenters who are also going to take us through a bit of a consideration around oceans. So we've heard a lot about how we think about kind of managing land and forests and thinking about deployment of renewables, community consultation, utilising sort of First Nations knowledge and how to work with people kind of on the ground, and what the business case is in terms of capital deployment. And I also now want to invite Mere, who's another one of our founding members from PYEN, to share some reflections on your work over the last 25 years and help us think about what we need to consider in relation to our oceans and wildlife. Thank you, Mere.
Ko kurangi te maunga, ko waiapu te awa, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, ko Paikia te tipuna. Nei rā te tukumihi aroha kia koutou e hoa mā. Firstly, I want to greet the elders of your land and, of course, acknowledge the traditional owners and all my people from PYEN 25 years later. Where has the time gone? My goodness. What have I been up to during that time? I have been working on the nexus between ocean and climate, but also looking at innovation in the area of nature-based economies, which is something I've just dedicated 4 years of my life to, writing my PhD in combination with establishing 3 global projects. What I wanted to comment, having listened to all of you tonight and the wisdom that's been shared, is really my reflections about the Pacific continuing to lead in the area of climate change and, of course, oceans, but often being neglected at the decision-making table. More recently, we were at the UN Oceans Conference in Nice, France, and there a number of huge announcements were made about various Pacific islands bringing in millions of kilometres of protected area across our oceans, you know, making big steps towards the 2030 goals of the globe. But I have to comment on that. While it is an amazing advancement forward, the thing that we're still not seeing is equity. You know, when it comes to important global agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, we've had 194 countries ratify this global agreement, and yet only a handful of countries are actually meeting their emission targets. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, all Pacific Island states combined contribute less than 0.03% of global emissions. So, you know, there's been incredible work done in the Pacific, both in the area of climate mitigation, emissions reduction, and ocean conservation, but yet we're still not seeing the funding flows happen. And I think it's really important that as policymakers, conservationists, and people dedicated to innovation and finding solutions for our great region, that we need to be honest about what we're up against. You know, as we speak, the UN is releasing new findings that are showing, consistent with previous years, that the globe is investing 7.3 trillion per annum into really bad projects for the Earth. And that includes energy as one of those main contributors. You know, fossil fuels, as we've said 25 years ago and to this day, need to be phased out. We're not seeing that progress. We're not seeing that commitment from the private sector. And even with climate finance, we aren't seeing those flows actually reach the custodians, the guardians, Indigenous communities globally, and of course our Pacific nations. So I think as we start to look forward, taking the reflections of both successes but huge structural failures that we're seeing at a global level, it's incumbent on us to understand these huge issues before us, because if we don't rectify issues around inequity, we are basically going to be looking down the pipeline of increasing climate change. Even if we don't reduce, if all countries were to come on board and actually reduce emissions as we speak, we're already in a runaway state, where Pacific Islands will see at least a 15 centimetre increase in sea level rise. That is why the oceans are so important. I'm focused 100% on my work in the Pacific right now, which is not only about protections, both customary, MPA protections across the Pacific, but actually understanding how important the Pacific is in terms of storing. It is one of our last bastions to store emissions. And the only way we're going to do that is kickstart our ocean systems, and that really comes down to looking at how do we regenerate our phytoplankton communities. They are the real heroes that at this very late hour can help us. And of course, that is why one of the core reasons why I'm focused on recovery of traditional whale populations. We had 2 million whales before the onset of industrial whaling from the turn of the 18th century until, you know, the more recent times with the introductions of the whale sanctuaries that we were advocating for so long ago. But the issues are still real. So rewilding is something that I believe can help the Pacific Ocean to recalibrate, kickstart life as we know it. And let me leave it there because I'm sure there's other people that want to comment on that. But the last thing I will say is a big focus for us is using legal instruments like rights of nature. You may be familiar with the He Whakaputanga Moana Declaration, which I had the great privilege of authoring and having support from various Polynesian ariki, including the late Māori King, to Heitea. More recently, I am working with the state of Tonga and also have ambitions to spend 6 months this year working around French Polynesia to introduce this concept called the Moananui Sanctuary, which is really focused, as I mentioned, on rewilding, bringing back all of our Tonga, our mammal populations, our ancestors, by protecting the original blueprint of the Pacific, which in our cosmology starts at French Polynesia, and there are 8 huge blue corridors that emanate from this space and cut across most of our Central Pacific islands. So I just want to congratulate all of the speakers today, and of course all of the founding members of PYEN. We are still here and we are still fighting to ensure that our communities can survive the very, very real threats of climate change. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mere. And I really appreciate that last comment, thinking about rewilding, not only as we've heard sort of the importance of that in terms of how that links to even carbon credits and protecting forests and allowing for different types of energy such as solar, but the blue corridors, given that the ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface and currently sits at around 30% in terms of absorbing carbon emissions. So I want to also now introduce you to another one of our PYEN founders who's based in Europe, and welcome, Jay. I hope you're there. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm here. I've got my video. My video's been disabled by the host here. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes. Thank you.
Can we get that back on? Thanks.
Give you a sec to come live. So while we're on the topic of oceans, yes, go for it, Jay.
Yeah, great. Yeah, kia ora and greetings, everyone. I'm joining you from Spain today, so hola to those out there as well. Looking back to the year 2001, 25 years ago, and the coming together of the Pacific Youth Environment Network was a really inspiring time. With an amazing group of people that have gone on to do so many great things for the people and the planet. In subsequent years, I've invested my time and energy in really advancing the science and understanding of climate change impacts on the aquatic environment, and in particular understanding the complex interplay between human activities and climate change. And the reason this is really interesting for me has been because the greatest threats to the ecosystems is around, bridging these tipping points where we see unexpected changes in the environment, and where small impacts can lead to big consequences, but at the same time, they also provide opportunities for small changes to yield great benefits as well. So my research is really focused on disentangling these interactions between different environmental pressures and stresses, and then providing policy advice and acting at the science interface to implement policy actions to facilitate ecosystem recovery and restoration. Now, if we think about what we've achieved in the last 25 years, we look back to the year 2000 with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. That was sort of the first report of the state of the global environment at the time, looking at biodiversity and ecosystems, and the subsequent impact of that and advancement of that has led now to the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the biodiversity and ecosystem equivalent of the IPCC, where we have now produced both regional and global assessments of ecosystems and priority management actions to inform policy. Now, obviously, the challenge remains to bridge that science policy gap and take knowledge into action in the political realm. And, we're uniquely positioned in the Asia Pacific to do that. We have such a vast ocean and nations there to facilitate that in a multilateral space. And also, if we look to other regions of the world, such as in Europe and elsewhere, we can see instances where that cooperation and collaboration has worked. I think one example of that is the European Water Framework Directive that I'm increasingly working on these days in the European context, and some of those actions. So I think if I can leave people with a more positive outlook here, when we think about ecosystems, we often focus on, the negative impacts that they have. But the more I delve into the science and the more I've learned over the years, what we see is that ecosystems are amazingly resilient, and that when we make positive actions in a targeted way where we understand the science, we can yield, positive outcomes. And so that has been very inspiring work for me as I continue to educate the future generation in the academic and university settings.
Thanks, Jay. And we're going to now, I guess, we'll just have a round of applause for our online members. Thank you. And I'll go on to the kind of next slide. I think we've got one more message and then we're going to open it up to Q&A with the audience. I'll give our tech support a moment. This is just, by the way, a bit of an indication of kind of the temperature change that we are dealing with over time. So you can see there's absolutely an upward trajectory there that we're contending with in terms of the impact of temperature, and as we've heard, some of the manifestations of that in terms of impacts on the environment, and balancing that with some of these trade-off conversations, as we heard as well, around use of land and use of resources, and some of the choices that we're going to have to make now and into the future. So we'll then move on to the next slide. And we've got a message. We had invited the Honourable Matt Keane. He was unfortunately unable to make it, but if we move on to the next.
May I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people here with us today. Can I start this short video greeting by thanking Viisti Dickens and congratulating her for being a founding member of the Pacific Youth Environment Network, and other members of the network who might also be present today. A lot has changed over the past 25 years. On the plus side, we're seeing growing momentum in the global effort to cut greenhouse gas emissions. The advances of solar energy and storage give us real hope that the transition off fossil fuels can be achieved while our economies can continue to thrive. The conflict in the Middle East reminds us too that there is energy insecurity associated with oil and gas. Making and storing your own electricity, as you can with renewables and storage, looks even better. It's understandable many of us are fixated on news about what's going on in the Persian Gulf, but we shouldn't lose sight of the long-term threats posed by climate change either. Members of PYEN, of course, are well acquainted about the challenges that wilder weather and rising sea levels pose to populations across the Pacific. These perils don't make it any easier for your network's other tasks, such as environmental restoration and the transport and disposal of hazardous substances. You should take heart from all that you have achieved over the past 25 years and renew that spirit for the battles that are yet to come. We share much in common because climate change affects Australia as well. While the media's focus has been elsewhere, the threat of another coral bleaching event is looming for our Great Barrier Reef, and possibly for other areas in the Pacific also. Northern areas of the Great Barrier Reef have lately had a level 1 bleaching alert issued by the US agency NOAA, with small areas lifted to a level 2 risk. And the Reef's Marine Park authorities last week stated that there may soon be bleaching among heat-sensitive corals as well. Also, not noted by many, the Coral Sea itself posted a record sea surface heat for both the summer that just ended, and for February, data from our Bureau of Meteorology shows. The last time there was a below average February for the Coral Sea temperature was back in 1994, or about 7 years before your network even started. These issues have been building for some time. But we still have time to halt this warming, and the last thing we should do is give up ahead of this year's COP31 in Turkey. We'll have the pre-COP events here in Tuvalu and in Fiji. I encourage you all to stay focused in your futures and to make sure the leaders attending those events share your urgency and determination. The youth of today, especially in the Pacific, have the most at stake. You'll have to endure or enjoy the outcomes of what climate action the leaders of nations large and small take. Let's all do our best to nudge that needle towards enjoy for the sake of ourselves and the generations to come. Thanks for listening and all the best for the events during Climate Action Week.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah. So he very kindly fitted in a message to us for this evening. So pretty much over to an open floor. I wanted to invite everyone just to share some reflections in the room as well. You know, we've heard from kind of youth activists to pursuing that through to lobbying, to policy, to research, to looking at some of the legal aspects, some of the investment opportunities, some of kind of the trade-offs, some of the key conversations in terms of mobilising community and coming together to make things happen, even as we heard from Ray, you know, bringing together voices around a national energy board. So I'm really interested in hearing now from the audience and wanted to open up to those online and those in the room in terms of now what? What have you sort of taken away from what's resonated with you? What are some questions that you have, concerns, issues, opportunities that you think we should be thinking about? If we were to put forward kind of a point of view, yeah, what would you like to see? Any questions from the panel? So I'm going to stand up and just, open it up to the floor, I guess. Thank you. I'll come around.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm a student and I'm a part of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. And I was just wondering, in general, I've done a bit of work looking into the Pacific Island forums and Australia's general relationship with the Pacific, which seems to have gotten slightly better recently under the Labor government, but which wasn't taken as seriously under previous governments. In Australia because of their unwillingness to take climate as a serious issue. And I guess I was just wondering to what extent, PYEN is engaged with Australia's domestic policies or even foreign policies, such as gas extension projects. While 80% of our emissions are going overseas, and a lot of gas extensions are not going to be actually firming our own grid, that kind of thing. Or just general reflections of the panelists on the current state of affairs, I guess.
I don't think so just to answer directly, the network was much more geared towards the Pacific and did call on Australia to sign the then Kyoto Protocol, and so we did make some of those calls. As for getting sort of involved in a granular way in domestic politics, I don't think that's something that has really been a focus. I think in terms of bigger picture relationships between Australia and the Pacific, we've got COP31 coming, it's this year. That is just such a huge opportunity for dialogue. And more than dialogue, come on, let's do something. We're at UTS Startups here, and I love the way that startups people are always just saying, let's do something. So yeah, let's do something. I do think that the focus has definitely changed with the Albanese government, and there is a real interest and investment in renewables and rolling that out in the region. And it's good to see that some of the funding is geared towards sort of getting ready for renewables, because for a lot of countries, they need support to come up with a strategy that will work for them, and also to get in place some of the really technical teams that you'd imagine would be necessary to understand how to build a grid using renewables, which is something that Australia struggles with too. We've got a lot of our own issues with the transformation, and we're also rethinking our own energy regulators. There's actually like a formal process at the moment to reconsider the role and composition of AEMO, which is really our sort of energy and electricity operator. So it's a massive task that even with a very well-established and relatively well-funded country is still pretty daunting. So the other thing to think about in that context is just how specific it has to be for each country. One of the reasons that Australia sees itself as a renewable energy superpower is because we've got so much land, and that is not true for a lot of the Pacific nations. They are archipelagos. In some circumstances, for example, if you think about Nauru, they just don't have the landmass or the available landmass to set up solar in a kind of scaled way. It's just not available. So it does need to be very specific to each country. So I'm seeing that kind of engagement in early stages, but it's still it is very encouraging. And I think, what are you studying? Perfect. That's, in terms of being able to get involved and get work and make a career, that's an amazing combination.
Yeah, engineering and politics for those online. So, and I think the interesting thing, building on Sharona's comments, and I'll invite Ray if you want to also comment as well to the question in terms of spheres of influence, is, as you can hear from, the presentations by each of our founding members, people have kind of picked a sphere of influence, and that might change over time, but the idea is that you're seeking to make a difference and help kind of move things forward in a particular domain area. And everyone's kind of worked in multiple domain areas. Sharona's a lawyer and a former journalist. Ray's a community activist and now a government official, as well. You have your advisory business, right? And you're working at UTS. So I'm teaching at UTS and have been a management consultant, and we've heard that those online as well. Mede's worked very much in the whale, and now she's on Blue Corridors, and Jay has shifted the focus of conversation across aquatics. Yeah. Ray, did you want to add anything?
Thank you for that. I just would like to add, in terms of influencing Australian government's policy towards environmental cohesion, conservation, and the environmental outlook of the Pacific region. In 2001, we've heard this idea of the Kyoto Protocol coming up, and people have to pay for, to sign on emissions and stuff like that. And like I said earlier on, the narrative back then was new, and the Australian government followed suit. If I can recall correctly, George W. Bush was president of the United States. He didn't want to sign the Kyoto Protocol. And I think John Howard also in 2002 refused to sign on. So in 2001, I think most of what urged us to meet and to put some kind of pressure on government in various forums, like the United Nations Environmental Programme, Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific, and few other forums, Pacific Island Forum, secretariat and various youth offices. So we did something at that time to urge Australian government to understand that when the rest of the countries were signing on the Kyoto Protocol, the bigger economies like US and Australia refused. So our work at the time was to provide a pressure group, coordinate, I think, throughout the Pacific, to also provide that pressure to all our states to adhere to be signatory to the Kyoto Protocol. So I think that's one of the things that we eventually had lobbied, not only by PYEN, we were
May I begin by acknowledging
a very small group, but much bigger networks also, like the student network in all the universities, as well as the unions across the Pacific. So yeah, one way or another, we had some level of pressure on Australian government at that time to reconsider their stance on the Kyoto Protocol and to flow with the rest of the nations to sign the protocol.
Yeah, and Australia has signed the Paris Agreement and is now actively engaging with the Pacific in terms of this sort of next wave of conversation. Yeah, thanks, correct. Ray. Any other questions from the audience or comments? Yes.
Hi everyone, my name's Latai. I'm 25 years old and I am a Tongan woman born in Australia. This question is quite broad, but as a Pacific Islander that lives in the diaspora, my question is, with the knowledge that's been said today, I suppose, what does advocacy look like to you with the youth that's present today, especially for those who are of Pacific Islander descent but don't necessarily live in the Pacific Islands?
That is a good question. Does anyone want to have a go?
So part of my background was broadcasting. I worked for the ABC and then NITV, National Indigenous Television. And one of the most powerful things that you have is your voice. And when you exercise voice and things that are important to you, and you get that elevated into a wider audience that can hear you and take your friends along whilst you're using your voices, that's when it's powerful. So last year in Climate Action Week, we had a whole panel of youth at the end of the day, and it was Country and Climate was the event. Bless, they had me in tears on the stage. And there was a young lady from what is known as the Torres Straits, Zenith Kest, and then there was a young Tongan man, I believe, and oh my gosh, goodness, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And for me, allowing space for voices that I may not hear every day is really important. So I'm informed, and then I can loan my support in terms of who's saying what. And as adults, that's our role. It was my role when I was working in broadcasting. And for me, telling stories about Indigenous people was really important. And now when we are looking at who our neighbours are in this region, we need to support each other. So whether it's through writing, whether it's through radio, whether it's through television or online podcasts, or there are many different ways that you can start to express yourself, and making sure that you keep your integrity in your voice. So understand what's important to you, because there are people who will listen. And the reason that I was in tears on the stage was the young gentleman was talking about his island, Tuvalu, going under. And when he got married and had children, the way in which he'd be able to share that with his children in terms of where he came from would be through a digitisation of the island. that just shocked me and upset me greatly. And so how can we support our neighbours to the Pacific to make sure that what is needed is actually being advocated for? And we can't do that unless we have the voices of the islands actually informing it. So your power is there, and the way in which you can express it, and this was the thing for us in the Indigenous Programs Unit in the ABC, that I used to say to the young producers and directors, don't beat people over the head with the issues, because the power of the remote control is very real. So you need to craft the story and your voice in a way that people can hear you, and then once you've hooked them in, then you can kind of tell them the full details of what's going on, and therein lies the power of what you can do.
Susan just gave me an idea as well. This is the perfect year for you because the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, who are helping to run the COP process, they're looking for youth representatives. I think if you're passionate about it and that's something you want to do, it's just perfect timing. Like, get onto the website, find a phone number and call that phone number, and don't let whoever answers get off the phone until they tell you they're the right person, or they give you that person's phone number, and then call that phone number and keep going until you find someone who you can, find an avenue to have a direct avenue to have your voice heard this year, because your particular perspective is incredibly valuable, always and especially this year.
Yeah.
And just so you know, because what it will do, if the negotiators are listening to you, and that's an important if, it will also give them additional credibility when they're negotiating, and Australia is leading the negotiations. So they need you as much as you need them. And you just remember that when you're phoning and getting those numbers until someone actually makes it happen.
Yeah. I think that's a good message. Ray, I don't know if you want to jump in with any more comments about the role of youth, but I think back to all of us, we were just kind of individuals and wouldn't have done anything if we hadn't have kind of come together. So the other thing I would add is just find some like-minded people, even looking around the room tonight, who might be interested in taking this forward. Yeah, Ray.
I'll be there. I'll give you an example. The young lady's question, very important. In 1999, I've never flown overseas. I've never been out of my home country. There was a student union movement for the environment students in Australia, which we are part of the network called Students and Sustainability Conference, Western Sydney, Hawkesbury campus. I landed in Sydney International Airport with one small backpack because something strange was happening at home. Something very dangerous was happening. And I had this, you never had these slides, PowerPoint, all these things in 1999. We had these, the clear glass, you write on it and you put a lamp through it and you put it on a whiteboard. So I got some highlighters and I drew the map of PNG and then track it down to Gladstone, all the way to Queensland. And something called PNG to Queensland gas pipeline was coming through Gladstone. And it was coming through the Coral Sea. And I said, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to have, we're putting the Coral Sea at risk. So I landed here. That's when I first met Andrew. And then we teamed up, and I think Dr. Salman Stone was the environment secretary at the time. And she was in attendance in a fully packed auditorium. And had I let go and been timid, that pipeline would have come through. And we have a lot of earthquake in PNG, that part of the region. And I put a simple slide onto the auditorium, and I said, you see, there's a pipeline being planned that will run from Papua New Guinea highlands all the way down to the Gulf of Papua, crisscross down through Torres Strait, all the way down the Gulf of Carpentaria, central Queensland, and down to Gladstone. And if that happens, and I put this clear white slide with a simple map of PNG and Australia and the Coral Sea in between, and I said, you know, those bolts and nuts that you will lock those pipes, I don't care how heavy they are, how thick they are, when you have an earthquake in this region, which we have like 7.9 on the Richter scale, it will blow those pipes, and you can say goodbye to the Coral Sea, which is one of the heritage of Australia. Dr. Simon Stone jumped on her seat and said, that project will not happen. So you see,
wow.
Going back, that project never happened. We had a refinery built in Port Moresby. We saved some jobs there, and we saved the Coral Sea. So have I been timid if I had got scared of coming into a big smoke like this and stayed back, then we would have risked our Coral Sea. And we never knew a lot of earthquakes do happen and natural disasters. You cannot foretell. And so, given that example, it's always, you know, wherever you are planted, like I said, stand up for your community, stand up for your rights and what you feel. We will one day go back to wherever we came from. If you never speak your mind, you will never. Thank you.
Great example. Wow. Round of applause for that example. Thank you. And great question. Any other questions? Yes.
My name's Tracy. I'm a sustainability consultant. I am past my youth, unfortunately. But I am passionate about the Pacific Islands and travel, and I would love to contribute in a much bigger way. And whether I do a lot of environmental work on designing communities, so how do we connect with those First Nations people to get those ideas in, or any of the projects that you're running. We'd love to be advocates and a voice, but we need to understand enough about them to be able to support. There's a big kind of disconnect between, you know, the modern world functioning and getting back in touch with those First Nations peoples and the guardians of the forest. And, you know, my whole team and huge amounts of people in my industry would love to do volunteer work and become greater advocates and helpers in that space, but I'm not sure how.
Thank you. So how do people engage?
Oh, it's such a big question. And I think if we reflect on why there's the disconnect, particularly on this continent, and I know people now want to connect, and what does that mean? And as you say, how do we do it together? And therein lies the way in which power actually gets recognised and who has it, and how can that, in terms of, you know, the instruments that we all play with, and the lack of recognition that what we have to say as the original people has never been recognised before. And I know I'm talking in circles because I'm trying to get to a point. We have to have the relationship, pure and simple. And we need to be able to voice what's important to us in a way that doesn't get caught up in economic frameworks, because that's what we do. We monetize and commercialize everything. And for Indigenous people, that's almost an aside, that there are things that are fundamental to who we are and our cultural practices that need to hold their integrity. And then once we get on the same page with that, and we're coming from a baseline of that understanding and respect, and that there are ways in which we can move together with that understanding, that's when we're going to rock and roll. But at this point in time on this continent, and us as First Nations people, we're still trying to find Everyone's trying to find their way. And whatever business or sector you come from, there are still powers at play that disadvantage us and hide our voices, or when I say hide, suppress voice. It's changing, and I can feel it changing. So people having patience, people actually listening to what we're saying, and, on Thursday we're heading to a reframe within Country and Climate. So that's another event within, where are we? Climate Action Week Sydney. And it's how we can use the best of everything to reframe what we're doing on this continent, which might mean that there's a shake-up that needs to happen, because is what we're doing fit for purpose? No. Have Indigenous people's knowledge systems not just be tacked on the side and go, oh, we need to talk to Indigenous people like they have knowledge. We need to kind of baseline it and go back to actually what's important on this continent. And then when we grow from that and there is mutual benefit in what we're doing together, not just for us, but future generations coming through, that's when it's going to change. But if we keep commercialising things and there's no prosperity for Indigenous people of this continent, we're just going to see the same thing spiralling around and around. The economy will just keep doing what it does. All the government sectors and all of the sectors, government departments, they're just going to keep doing the same thing. Because Australia is a resource capital to the world. You think it's going to give up that power and that financial benefit? We are the sovereign people of this land. We have been absolutely hammered since the boats arrived. We're just getting to a point where the system is actually going, oh, maybe we should actually talk to, Indigenous people. Hello, we've been here for such a long time. So it's not an easy fix. And it is about the relationship, and it is about trust. Because there's been so many things and so many governments that have let us down, and we still don't have a formal agreement. We are the only Commonwealth nation that doesn't have a formal agreement. And back after World War II, the whole UN thing was around decolonising. Never happened here. That's the issue, and many other countries that have Indigenous peoples with agreements and treaties and all of those things. We attempted with a referendum, but was that what we really needed? And why were we asking everybody when that agreement should have been between us and the colonisers? We are still living under the colony. We are the original people of this land. If you want to do business with us, then you need to first have a relationship, because otherwise you're just doing what the rest of the system is doing. And for me personally, I don't trust yet. And that's a really tough thing to say, because I'm raising children and I'm telling them to trust. I'm telling them to go out, use their voice and things like that. Me personally, I don't, sadly, in 2026. I was part of the removal process. I'm part of the stolen generations. I'm a survivor of that. Do I trust? Not completely. Do I keep advocating and working to try and fix the situation? Absolutely. Which is why I love the TD school, because it brings in a lot of disciplines that could actually attempt to solve the biggest issue on this continent and look at the source wound that happened to us, and then how do we move forward from that? So it's the relationship. Before we start doing any business, culture first, caring for country, reframing country. Because if we position country first, then when the mining companies want to come in and we've positioned country, they have to go and speak to the people who belong to country. Changes the dynamics of everything. That's when I'm going to be really happy and I'll start to trust.
Thank you. Thank you. Powerful message. Yeah. And I think just playing back is engagement first, listening, trust building, and sort of establishing those relationship protocols to then go on and talk about how we can work together, and making sure that you are engaging Indigenous businesses and voices in the process of doing any other kind of business, right? Yeah, great, thank you. Ray, Sharona, did you have anything else you wanted to add in terms of either engaging with Pacific countries and how people can engage, for example, PNG in Pacific, and or Sharona, what you've seen? You mentioned some of those constituent bodies and some of the kind of frameworks that are available, but kind of I'm hearing maybe more on the ground level as well, how that might be approached.
I'm just also conscious that we've still got Mary on the line, and she might want to.
Oh yeah.
Speak to
Mary
that as
and
well.
Jay might also want to add something. Thank you. We are going to open up for some questions online as well as in the room, time permitting. Yeah. Mary, did you have any? Mary or Jay, did you want to jump in at all with any further reflections?
Well, again, reflecting on what I consider to be a great failure of the last 25 years at a global level in terms of climate policy and meaningful progress toward emissions reductions. At the same time, pivoting to the Pacific and seeing the enormous successes that have been achieved from the region, and now reading the geopolitical nature and landscape that we're currently facing. We need to remember that we as Pacific peoples actually hold the solutions. We need to be able to stand in our authority and recognise that we have the runga, we have the medicine that the world needs now. We have beautiful Indigenous traditions. We are one of the most diverse regions, and flowing from that culture is an array of solutions. Going back to the original blueprint of our ancestors is one example. But one of the things I did want to, unfortunately we didn't have time, is talk about the promise of nature-based solutions and nature-based finance. Although we're not seeing those finance flows right now coming into the Pacific, I do foresee that with better advocacy and regional join-up, with youth playing a very powerful voice, there's huge scope and potential to be attracting that investment. I myself have been involved in campaigns to raise 100 million for various different projects, and I can say with that kind of background, it's completely feasible. We need to again go back to being self-determining countries, recognising everything that's coming toward us, and if we're not focusing on nature-based economies that can drive and power our future, with innovation being core, we're going to continue to be in this current situation that we're in, where you can have all of the wonderful, great policies of the world, but very little action on the ground where it matters most. I think for me, it's about being audacious, being courageous, and using that power of collectivity to really create solutions that can keep us on the map, but noting that we need to be better at bringing those funding flows into the Pacific. The Pacific has an amazing value proposition to the world. We are sitting on the world's largest carbon sink, the Pacific Ocean. We are sitting on the world's greatest biodiverse ocean basin in the world. And yet, when it comes to carbon markets and these sorts of realities, we haven't been able to push ahead. So my organisation is exactly looking at non-offset based ways to be able to bring those finance flows into Pacific Islands in a way that takes Indigenous knowledge and wisdom with us, as well as science, to create the meaningful solutions that we all want. So I just want to kind of give that testimony that success can be achieved and that there is hope despite the fact we don't have a lot of time. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mary. And Jay, did you want to jump in as well?
I mean, something I'd like to add here, just to address some of the questions from some of the younger members of the audience about how they can actively have a voice in advocating these, for the change that they desire, is that what we need, we see a lot of youth activity on social media and things like that, but actually the young people mobilising and having a voice through the policy instruments that are in place in their national and regional areas, they still exist. So mobilising, particularly in university settings, we've seen how powerful they can be. We've seen that through the Palestine protests in different places. We can see that in the climate action arena as well. And using the policy instruments to put submissions to Parliament, to your local governments, and to influence your environment ministers in this process, it's very hard for them to turn a blind eye to collective voices of young people. So don't feel disempowered. You should feel empowered, and you should take the initiative and use the instruments that are at hand and available to you, even though individually it may not seem like it's going to have a big impact.
Thank you. And I think that kind of builds on some of the themes that we've covered as well. Do we want to talk nature-based solutions and nature-based finance as well, just building on some of the comments from Mere? Can I invite Sharona and Ray to add to that? And then I'm going to follow up with a question up there. Yeah.
With the time left, I think maybe just to build on what Jay was saying, actually, some of these questions about paths for engagement, I agree that there are the formal processes, but don't forget about your local MPs, honestly. It so happens that I live in the Prime Minister's electorate, but if you call up the electorate office, it's a busy office, obviously, and say that you've got a comment that you want your local member to hear, they are responsive. It sounds so obvious, but there are so many people posting on social media, not as many writing to their local politicians. And if you're that person, not only are you speaking directly to someone with potentially a position to change policy, do something different, connect you with other people that they might be aware of who are interested in your issues, you're probably going to be one of relatively few people who actually reach out to them who are not like either a bot or a nutter. So you're probably going to be welcomed in terms of that outreach, and I think that's something that we tend to forget. So I would just encourage people to consider that as well. In terms of nature-based solutions, I think that if I can sort of look back at one of the points that we put in the Wollongong Declaration, which I was interested to see was in there, was one of the final things we said was basically we had to consider a shift away from an economic model that relied on infinite growth based in a world that was finite. And, there was a moment about 6 years ago where even the titans of the finance industry were starting to talk about stakeholder capitalism replacing shareholder capitalism. And what does that mean? It basically meant that companies were entitled to think more broadly than simply in their quarterly earnings reports, and that they actually not only could but should be thinking about the long term. And that's what starts to allow considerations of climate risks and impacts, which is obviously part of nature, as well as the natural world more broadly. Susan's talked about the risk of commercialising everything, and that I think is a really valid criticism of the whole framing of nature-based solutions and trying to monetize the natural world, and I think it can go really awry. Part of what I do is try to find a sensible and responsible path through, where on one hand you're finding ways to attract the needed financing to communities and ecosystems that are being either neglected or actively damaged and undermined, where no other source of funding currently exists, against that real risk, because there is something inherently, I think for me, I still react against it at some deep level, like kind of the idea of putting a dollar value on a forest or an ocean. But I think we need to remember, and I remind myself, the trick is to not let that become the only value ascribed to it. It's a way of recognizing that since the Industrial Revolution, companies have made trillions on the back of these systems just through taking, and not realizing that there is a mutual dependency there. So that's what I think is really interesting about that. The challenge we still have in terms of investing in nature in the absence of offsets is that unless companies have to do it, they won't. And I say that cautiously because until a few years ago they would. And they did, and they were investing heavily. They were voluntarily making climate targets. And then the rise of greenwashing regulatory clampdown, which was needed in some ways because some of those claims were not properly explained in a way that they became misleading, or they were just false, right? So there were bad actors. But I can tell you from personal experience that when you're a lawyer and your job is to advise on risk, essentially, and you have a client who says to you, should we make a voluntary climate target and publish it to the world in circumstances where we do not have to do it, and in circumstances where every tiny part of that claim is going to be picked at and attacked and realistically result in litigation and reputational damage, should we do it? The heart may want to say yes, do it anyway and just get it right. But a lot of lawyers have obviously said no, because now we're seeing backsliding, right? The difference is where they do have to do it. And under Australian domestic legislation, some companies do have to make investments into carbon projects because it's the law. The same is not true for nature. You will hear in my industry lawyers who want to be paid by people who advise them on these things. They will say, well, it wasn't mandatory a few years ago in climate until it suddenly was. Therefore, it will be in nature. I think we can all see that, that therefore is doing a lot of work there that I don't know is justified. So until and unless someone who has to pay for their use of nature is forced to do it, it is difficult to see how large-scale investments in nature are going to happen. And I think one of the indicators of that difficulty is what we see in Australia at the moment, where we do theoretically have a functioning nature repair market, but there are almost no projects. Because there isn't a demand, because the demand will come when people have to do it.
And I think if I can just add to that briefly, there is momentum towards some types of legislation that will probably drive that further, right? In terms of the Task Force for Nature-Based Disclosures, sort of similar to the carbon emissions And also, hearing from the likes of Mede and Jay that, there's also kind of first mover actors who are showing pathways to innovation and what that could look like in terms of a sort of strategic advantage. So it's, to your point, it's a balance of kind of risk and opportunity for different organisations. I'm just conscious of time. It's been a great discussion. I might see if we can go kind of rapid fire. We've got another question here at the back, and then we've got a couple online as well.
Hello, I'm a student. I'm studying marine science, and I'm always very interested in how does blue carbon market work for Pacific. Is there any opportunity for Pacific Island to use blue carbon market for ensuring there won't be any greenwashing, and we will respect the outdoor and the native, while ensuring that the money will go back to the Pacific native owner?
Thank you. So how do we think about making sure that any of those kind of instruments enable capital to flow back to the Pacific markets? Yeah, I don't know if Ray, do you want to jump in as well? Yep.
So one of the best examples is the legislation in PNG. And it's basically come online since December last year when some of Ray's colleagues actually, the climate change department in PNG finalised their regulation, and it mandates that a minimum of 60% of net revenues of every carbon credit sold must go directly back to the traditional custodians of whatever land that the carbon project is carried out on. So that's a minimum. The maximum that can go to a developer is 29%. It is a lot of work. Companies have to pay their bills, but I think that's the basic answer to that. So it is, it's got good law, good regulation, good regulators, and one of the mandatory aspects of it is that before you can even get your permit, you have to go through a lengthy consultation with the community. And there's like a minimum number of meetings over a minimum number of time that you have to do it. So you can't just get in there and do it quickly. Like, it's got to be a proper documented consultation. And as part of that, you reach an agreement on how to share the benefits. And the minimum starting point is 60% of net revenues go directly back to the communities.
Yeah. Ray, did you want to just expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, like Sharona has said, it's a new legislation. Different countries have different islands, different people have different traditional laws. And custodian, even back in PNG, we have differences again within the clans. So in some society, 50% of the society, the maternal side of it will benefit from that 60%, while the paternal side of the family will not. So a company has to talk with the maternal side in other cultures, like 50% of the culture back there. And then in the rest of the other cultures, the investors will have to talk with the paternal side of it. So, it's a bit tricky, but they've worked out a legislation that compensates. I think it all snowballed from what we call in NRM terms payment for environmental services. I'm not sure if you have heard of it, PES. So payment for environmental services is, the aesthetic value. The aesthetic value of the sunset, you can't put it on a money scale. The aesthetic value of a tree, particular tree that is very beautiful, you can't put a money value on it. So given all these NRM practices, come up with this policy. So it's a bit tricky. And the downside is the enforcement part of it. Like Sharona has said, you need a permit. So once you get a permit, who monitors the permit so that the developer keeps within the conditions of the permit? That's the challenging part. But otherwise, it's set to work starting this year and going forward.
Thank you. And Mede, did you want to share anything further from other parts of the Pacific that you've seen?
Yeah, I just wanted to share. It was a great question from the audience there. I mean, the issue of Indigenous equity has, at a global policy level, been wrapped around the carbon markets. It's really comes down to private actors and whether or not they're subscribing to those best practices. We know there are a lot of bad carbon projects out there, and the early projects that happened in South America, Altamaya, are a perfect example, and there's been many others. So I applaud those countries like Papua New Guinea that are actually embedding these principles of equity within the legislation. It is absolutely a step in the right direction. For our organisation, the Pacific Whale Fund, and I've got to mention that, and also our charity Moananui Sanctuary Trust, we build out not necessarily blue carbon, but because we're moving beyond carbon with our Indigenous modalities. But essentially, you need to make sure you have the right legal infrastructure in place, and we choose rights of nature to put that in place to be able to ensure things like the commodification of nature, which is a common belief that a lot of Indigenous communities have. This is the way we're sidestepping that, because at the end of the day, with nature markets, it's not actually the resource, so to speak, that's being commercialised, it's the eco services. And I think that's really, really important that people recognise that. So, for instance, the way we've approached the creation of what you could say is a biodiversity credit for the whale, it actually isn't about commodifying the whale. What we're focused on is showing the uplift of biodiversity and the uplift of modi or life source energy within the waters that the whale travels across, because of course, as we all know, the whale not only sequesters huge amounts of carbon, but plays a huge role in the biological pump of the ocean, which ensures that those phytoplankton populations can be healthy and indeed increase. So we take our Indigenous lens when we're creating these nature finance instruments, but our approach is really a combination of looking at other instruments. Blue natural capital is something that's for my organisation is the future. It's not about single metrics like carbon. It's about recognising the whole ecosystem and acknowledging the value that all of nature's services provide to us as humanity. Because if you don't place that value, we're going to have the same thing that we have now, which is Western markets, extracting value from nature, but in the wrong way, i.e. taking whales out of the ocean, or taking our trees, or mining. All of these these development models, which is the reason why we're at this critical state within our environment. So, this is about moving away from extractive economics toward biocircular economic models, which are much more in line with traditional Indigenous values, because they are based on abundance. They're based on not on scarcity model economics of the West. They are based on regeneration as a fundamental principle. They are based on equity. And so it's incumbent on us as Indigenous communities who don't have a lot of time to be taking the best practices from the West and the best practices from our Indigenous communities to evolve models which are much more sustainable and much better for people and nature both. So I think, this is a space where we as Pacific peoples, we really should be sharing the information. I've been lucky to be working with the best marine scientist in the world who has been the founder of Blue Natural Capital. There are new models coming into play, and yet we in the Pacific really, not many countries are moving forward in this space yet. So that is my aspiration, is that our young people today advance quickly to solution thinking. We all know the challenges, but let's move beyond that, because policy, in my opinion, isn't going to get us there. We need to be looking at big-scale projects that are going to restore nature. And let's face the facts, restoring nature is not cheap. I have a methodology to restore my whole coastline, my tribe. It's going to cost me millions. How am I going to access that with a government that doesn't believe in this kind of sector? You know, New Zealand is very, very far behind. I have to reach out to international markets and create pathways for financing, you know, which does mean that there has to be a level of negotiating, you know, exactly what that looks like. So I'll leave it there, but because I can see Jay has some good things to add there.
Yeah, and just quickly, I like the sort of characterisation of not whale as a sort of object, but whale as a system. So this idea of systems thinking around the interrelationships and some of the sort of flow-on effects in terms of benefits and opportunities as well. I'm really conscious of time, so I might make this an invitation for some closing comments, and we'll just go quickly, Jay, and then to the rest of the panel. And I apologise to those online, we might not have got through all of your questions tonight, but happy to sort of take them and think about a way forward from here. Yeah, Jay. And can I ask, Meadow, you stay on camera as well, because we've got this beautiful image of you and Jay, and it feels like you're part of the panel with us here in the room. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just on the topic of nature-based solutions and how we can, you know, support the underpinning ecosystem services for human well-being. You know, it's the sound science that supports that, and we've had the challenges in the carbon market. And to some degree that will happen again in the nature-based solutions as well, because the science is evolving, it is changing, it is adapting, and ecosystems do not necessarily respond, you know, the same everywhere. So, you know, we have to keep driving the science in that area. We have to keep understanding the interconnectedness of ecosystems and ultimately protecting the underpinning biodiversity and the ecosystem functions. So that's an exciting area to continue to be working in, and to have the support of public and private partnerships in that space is also really exciting.
Thanks, Jay. Sharona, closing comments.
Coming back to the relationship between Australia and the Pacific, I just think to the maximum extent that we can, there should be, you know, an openness to facilitating investments from Australia into the Pacific, whether that's through supporting climate projects, and it should be potentially purchasing any credits that they generate to use back in our own system, sharing knowledge as a collective, and also I think that sharing knowledge and expertise and training and deployment of renewables is a huge opportunity, and I think it's one that the private sector should be looking at very closely, and that young people considering the first and second and third steps of their careers should also explore.
Thank you, Sharona. Ray?
In closing, I would say I think Australia and New Zealand needs to step up, continue the leadership in the region. We've already seen that in the energy sector. We have the AIFFP, Australian Infrastructure for the Pacific, that's rolling out massive renewable energy projects across all Pacific Island countries, and also in other areas in the conservation market system. So Australia and New Zealand needs to continue to step up, not in a very big way, but continue to support the resilient system in the Pacific Island, especially with youth education and funding of youth advocacy across the Pacific, so that the future generation, as we sail away from our traditional customs, which I'm finding it very difficult in my home. My children can speak my own language, and I try my best to say, teach them, but because they're growing up in the city, So eventually we will one day end up like the great Kemet civilization in Egypt and the great Mesopotamian civilizations that ended. And sooner or later, all the indigenous knowledge will go. That's the sad thing that I always think about every night when I go to bed. And the knowledge is fast going out. So we need countries to take leadership in making sure that those knowledges are kept. The efforts of every Pacific Island country is recognized, and there's some cohesion instead of working in silos. So that's my parting message. Australia and New Zealand to take lead in supporting Pacific Island countries who have initiatives to conserve their culture, conserve their biodiversity, conserve their ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And PNG is, I think, the most linguistically diverse nation in the world with around 700 languages spoken.
Short and sweet. I live in hope that we're going to get it together.
Thank you, Susan. I feel like that in itself deserves a round of applause. Christina, did you want to? Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to Christine and to the students. That was absolutely beautiful and most unexpected. And I just want to thank everyone in the room tonight and give yourselves a round of applause, and those online who've joined us. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess my closing reflections are that, some great progress has been made. People have chosen a space to work in and continue to evolve that at an individual level, and we can see the impact of that collectively, both in terms of generating new types of knowledge and integrating generational knowledge, in terms of creating innovation, but ensuring that design is predicated on a sort of circularity practice as well. So I think there's some really lovely principles there and some wonderful reflections from the panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening, and happy 25th anniversary, and looking forward to seeing what you guys are going to do with the next 25 years, and us as well. Thank you. Yeah, actually, Maddie and Jay, do you want to stay online and we'll just get a photo with you on the panel? And for everyone else, please feel free to grab a drink and a bite to eat and say hello to at least 2 people you haven't ever met before, and we'll be up there in a second to join you as well. One last thing for everyone who's here. Can we also have a big round of applause to all of our volunteers who helped, and our photographer and our tech support. Thank you so much. And thank you to our sponsors, Viridius Capital as well. Thank you. Okay, enjoy your evening, and please feel free to meet some new people. Thanks.